Hey, FFR listeners! If you love getting to listen in on our convos each week, consider helping us keep bringing our signature brand of feminist pop culture analysis to you by joining our Patreon community at patreon.com/femfreak. You can get early access, exclusive bonus episodes, participate in AMAs, join our friendly Discord server, and more. That's patreon.com/femfreak. See you there.
He's comfortable in his skin. He's kind of cool. He's kind of hot. We're supposed to find him so appealing. So then when we find out that he kills his fucking wife and gets away with it, it doesn't matter. Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm sharing frozen margaritas today with my personal stunt doubles, Carolyn Pettit.
Hey, hey.
And Ebony Adams.
Hey.
In this week's episode, we're going to discuss Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a lighthearted romantic comedy about two single guys trying to make it big in the city. Trying to make it in the big city, big in the city, same thing. Anyways, we'll get right to that. Okay, everybody, can before we get started on this, can I just say one thing quickly?
Yes.
No.
Can we do anything other than talk about this movie?
I'm with you on that.
No,
cool.
No, we can't. See, this is where I don't call in favors often. I don't demand often. I didn't even demand this time, but I said, you know what? This movie, there's just so much to talk about in this movie. We can't not talk about it. And I knew that neither Anita nor Ebony was going to enjoy it, but I nonetheless.
But I like to watch them suffer.
Yeah, I was like yesterday at like 4 p.m. I was like, oh man, Anita and Ebony are in the theater right now.
Right in the middle of it.
Hating life. That was. I definitely was.
We were literally passing notes in the movie theater.
Yeah,
in the movie. At one point, Ebony wrote, "Carolyn is fired." I wrote, "Look, this is forever. We are never leaving. This movie is never going to end."
We can't.
I love that you
ever talk about the things that we like.
Of course.
I love that you are using this like as a voucher, Carol. Like you're calling in a voucher on this, and I feel like I don't know why that's hilarious to me, but I will say that on the.
I feel like the last time there was a movie that I was like kind of insistent was, Call Me By Your Name. And that was like 2 years ago now. So,
it's fair.
It's not like
a much more worthwhile use of a voucher.
To cash in very often,
Yeah, we all get one every 2 years.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to use mine.
You know what mine's going to be?
What?
The Patrick Swayze documentary.
Oh, you don't have to use a voucher for that.
Sweet. All right,
wait,
Carolyn, before we dive into this fucking nightmare horror dream of a movie, give us some great entertainment news.
Okay. All right.
Now that you're all riled up.
All right. First of all, so there's a game that's, been in development for a few years now, called Ooblets, which is this really adorable looking, quasi Pokemon-esque, but I don't want to like pigeonhole it as that, but it has maybe broad similarities to something like Pokemon, but this really adorable game called Ooblets that's been in development for years. I think I've seen it at a few different shows here and there, and it just looks really charming. And within the past few weeks, it came out, or the Ooblets devs, announced that they had made a deal with Epic for exclusivity. So Ooblets is going to be an Epic Game Store exclusive, and I don't know, some of our listeners may be aware, some may not, but there is a bizarre and really deep and ferocious anger among many, self-proclaimed gamers about pretty much the very existence of the Epic Game Store. And when devs make deals for sort of exclusivity with Epic Games, because these particular gamers are extremely resistant to the idea of having to ever install and use a platform other than Steam, right? Steam is sort of established as the PC gaming store, and these gamers are don't want games to be exclusive on platforms that are not Steam. And so when it was announced that the Ooblets had made a deal, and these are these are like indie devs, like truly a small team of indie devs for whom I'm sure the financial, the compensation and everything being awarded, presented by Epic is like truly beneficial, like helping them create the game, make it the game they want it to make, and just, not have to worry about finances so much and everything, right? A really good thing in the lives of these devs. The devs became the targets of just an absolute torrent of truly, vile, racist, misogynist, online hate and abuse. And they wrote a Medium post kind of detailing what that experience of being the target of that kind of harassment, sustained harassment, are like, with a lot of examples, tweets and things, examples of the harassment that they've received. And it really just, it's extremely like disheartening. It's infuriating. It's and it really, it illuminates that, boy, do we sure still have, of course we do, but boy, we sure still have a real problem with like attitudes of entitlement, but also just like racist, misogynist hostility, within gaming culture, as far as a vocal segment of gaming consumers feeling very entitled to have things a certain way, and to weirdly, to not want any kind of serious competition to Steam, which is just another Valve's, it's Valve's storefront. It's just another big corporation. Anyway, so we'll post the Medium post in the show notes, but just so disheartening, not just because that game looks so just charming and colorful and upbeat and, and cheery, but and weirdly, it's like I can't look at these reactions, the vitriolic reactions that have surfaced in response to this, without thinking like, okay, like a lot of you who are frothing at the mouth with rage about this, like, this is not a game that was even on your radar before. Like, this is not the type of game that you probably even care about. You're just flailing with rage over like the principle of it, but I don't, it's weird. Like I at least I understood on some level the misogynist rage at the heart of Gamergate. But when people flip the fuck out over like the Epic store, it's very difficult for me to understand what even the basis for that rage is.
There's so much hostility towards the Epic store, which, whatever, you can be mad about it, but the fact that there's like just the change and competition to Steam means that there should be this kind of vitriolic rage. It's so gaming. Like, that's the sad thing about it, is like, it's not unexpected.
It's very, very ridiculous. Gaming, yes. In other news, probably, somewhat better, or at least, more exciting news. So the next season of American Crime Story is going to deal with the Monica Lewinsky, the Bill Clinton impeachment hearings, which obviously, of course, involved what we might call the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Excitingly, Monica Lewinsky herself is serving as a producer on the season, and the wonderful Beanie Feldstein, who was in Booksmart, was also in Lady Bird, and who, I just adore, is actually playing Monica Lewinsky, which I think, is probably a pretty strong bit of casting, and I'm just excited to see more of Beanie Feldstein in just about anything. So yeah, other aspects of this. Sarah Paulson, who is of course a regular in like Ryan Murphy's shows, the American Horror Story and American Crime Story. Sarah Paulson is going to play Linda Tripp, and Annalee Ashford, I don't know who that is, but Annalee Ashford is going to play Paula Jones. But anyway, and it's based on Jeffrey Toobin's book, A Vast Conspiracy, the real story of the sex scandal that nearly brought down a president. And, given...
What was that like?
Say what?
Remember those days? I said, remember those days?
Right. Whew. Yeah. And given that I think the OJ season 1 was, of course, about the OJ Simpson trial, and I think that it brought a lot of interesting complexity to the portrayals of Martha. I'm blanking on her name, but the prosecutor. In that case,
why can't we remember her name?
Yeah,
I know. I'm sitting here quietly, furiously trying to think of it.
Marcia Clark.
Marcia Clark, of course, Marcia Clark. So I'm encouraged to. I think it's encouraging that Monica Lewinsky is serving as producer on this. That leads me to believe that it's not going to be some sort of simplistic depiction that sort of perpetuates the ways in which Lewinsky was kind of demonized and dragged through the mud, but hopefully will actually examine that in some interesting ways.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd be interested in watching it if she were not a producer, if it was just the topic, but now I actually am quite interested.
Yeah. All right. With that, we can move on.
All right. Well, that wasn't bad.
Yeah.
That wasn't bad. I was expecting worse.
Wow.
I don't know. Entertainment news from our perspective is always a little rough. All right. Well, let's take a quick break and we'll get to the main segment.
Hey, Feminist Frequency Radio listeners. We'd love to have you join our Patreon community. Hop on over to patreon.com/femfreak. Do it now!
All right. Welcome back. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is the 9th film from writer-director Quentin Tarantino and has been described as the director's love letter to LA. The film is set in 1969, and it's a meandering fairy tale about an industry, a society, and a sun-soaked city on the cusp of irrevocable change. Here we go. Let's add that to the list of words I can't say.
I think another one's coming up.
Jesus. Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt take center stage in a story that's loosely woven around a popular actor dealing with his rapidly diminishing star power and his longtime stunt double / friend / personal assistant who is revealed to have a horrific backstory. But there's a larger drama in the background of Tarantino's canvas, behind the bustling film sets, iconic LA eateries, and homes in the Hollywood Hills. There's a story being told, or kind of like not being told, about the infamous murders at 10050 Cielo Drive, in which actor Sharon Tate and 4 others were brutally killed. In the end, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood snakes its way to an orgy of violence via a route as winding and circuitous as Mulholland Drive.
All right, quick note here. So I helped Anita prep the background for this episode, and the descriptions of Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt I wrote were
it took him out.
Serial starlet dater Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert Redford impersonator Brad Pitt.
Which were great, but then Carolyn and I were discussing it, and I kept being like, wait, but the character wasn't a serial dater, and then I got confused, and then I was like, well, some other dummy out there is going to get
And
confused.
then you were like, Ebony is going to make sure that we get those jokes in anyway, so yeah. Anyway,
all right.
Moving on.
Carolyn, I think that you should start this conversation.
Oh, and just real quick,
I want to know
Caro,
what you find redeeming about this movie before we rip it to shreds.
Well, I wouldn't even say that I mean, okay, this movie in my mind is so. I wouldn't say that I find much redeeming about the film. I will say that I find this film endlessly fascinating and a film that is not that I certainly have simple interpretations of. Like I think that there are valid interpretations of it that are very simple. So ultimately, like. When I first came out of the film, I tweeted that this is a film that is an ode to like a particular kind of white masculinity that to a time when a particular kind of white masculinity dominated both our culture and our cinema, and by being that kind of film, it perpetuates that, like, or it kind of it looks at it with such rosy nostalgia, and it kind of longingly, in a way that almost seeks to, I mean, not that period has ever ended, truly, of course, but on its most basic level, like, this film is very regressive. Like, just in terms of how it functions, it is absolutely like a really regressive, deeply misogynist, in my view, film. But like, and yet I'm still fascinated by it. It doesn't mean that I think it's good or that its cultural impact is good. I think it's not, but I find it very fascinating for so many reasons. I mean, part of that stems from I just come to this film with an interest in Hollywood history, right? And so and I think that 1969 is a particularly interesting time because it is, as this film presents it in some ways, it is in some ways the cusp, the end of a particular era, because you're looking at a time. It's right. It's so Roman Polanski, who is a figure in this film. He doesn't say much at all. He's almost always absent, in Europe shooting another film, which is where he was when Sharon Tate, his wife, was so brutally murdered by members of the Manson clan. But Leonardo DiCaprio's character remarks, "Oh, hey, like, that's the director of Rosemary's Baby. Like, he's like the hottest director in Hollywood right now." And you're right on the cusp of when people like Scorsese and to some extent George Lucas, but and Coppola and all these people would really, Spielberg, we're going to come along and really like change mainstream movies and just change our cultural relationship to movies. And so, like, the way in which this film kind of is positioned at that very transitional point in history, to me, is so fascinating. I mean, I'm just fascinated again by that period, and I don't think that this film's attitude toward that period is a positive one or a healthy one that we should embrace. But when I see, when I see Brad Pitt just driving with the wind in his hair down like Sunset Boulevard, and you see like, oh, the Cinerama Dome, and you see like these like iconic locations from that period in Hollywood history, like I think it's a very seductive film, and there's a part of me that wants to give myself over to being seduced by those things, because I do, because yes, I do have that, like, and I'm suspicious of it. I question it. I challenge it. I want to resist it, but I also recognize that I do have that adoration for just for Hollywood, and so Brad Pitt's character, the stuntman, he lives in Van Nuys, right behind like a drive-in theater or something. And I grew up I lived in Van Nuys for a while. I lived in Reseda for a while. Like, these are areas in which in some ways, the magic of Hollywood, like, it's right there, it's like right over the hill, but it couldn't feel farther away, right? These are kind of like the flat strip mall wasteland areas. And I just think it's fascinating too, the way that you see how unglamorous like Brad Pitt's character's life is, even though he literally works in the movies, right? Like his life is not one of Hollywood glamour by any stretch, right? He lives in he lives in a dingy trailer with his dog, behind, like I said, like a drive-in theater.
I would also say,
so I could, like, to me, when I even sit down to think about this film, there are like 500 different directions that my mind wants to go off in. So many different like angles and aspects of the film that I think are worthy of being like explored and looked at and talked about. And none of that changes the fact that ultimately I do think it is a regressive, very misogynist, obviously very white film. Like I'm holding both of those things simultaneously.
So Anita and I just saw the film last night at the time of this recording, and I suspect that given enough time, my reaction will transmute into one in which I am able to achieve a little bit of distance and can, tease out my response to a lot of the threads that are woven into just a hugely expansive tapestry in this film. But one of the things that I want to talk about, Caro, is you mentioned that, you found yourself wanting to be seduced. And the film absolutely does want to seduce, its viewers with this vision of LA, with this feeling of LA, at this very kind of, outlaw time. But for me, in the current moment in which I live, I found the attempts at, the film seduction to be too fumbling and a bit too obvious for me to fall prey to them. And perhaps it's just I'm not like at any point, I think, the sort of, target demographic for a movie about, middle-aged white men feeling bad about not being as cool as they used to be or not being as powerful as they used to be. But I do... There were parts of the film that I was incredibly interested in, largely the parts, as you alluded to, about LA and the sort of like distribution of LA and the parts of LA that aren't, conceived of as part of LA in our popular imagination, like Van Nuys or, the Valley, when we think about Hollywood, and the ways in which, Quentin Tarantino, populates this film with a huge constellation of characters, some of whom are, real people. Mm-hmm. Roman Polanski, Steve McQueen, who I love Damian Lewis as Steve McQueen in this,
and even,
Mama Cass,
even a lot
whatever.
Of the bit part actors, like I didn't know this when I was watching the film, but say like the character that, that on the Western show that Dalton,
mm-hmm.
Leonardo DiCaprio's character gets part on, like the character played by Luke Perry is a real, like, B actor. The character played by the guy from Deadwood and Justified and all that.
Yeah.
He's, a real actor, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like the positing, the populating on this giant canvas of these real people and then these composites and then just these sort of like fairy tale archetypes. I am interested in where and how that happens. But in the final... Well, actually, I should say not final, because as I say, I think given time, I'll be able to talk about this with more critical distance. But in this preliminary analysis, I was just left so turned off by the sort of moments of like, vibrant color and the ways in which the film tries to seduce me. And I'm thinking most clearly of the moment when Brad Pitt as stuntman Cliff Booth is up on his friend's roof, on Leo's roof, attempting to fix the TV antenna. And he takes off his shirt. And there's this sort of moment where the camera lingers on his body. And he's this sort of like California sun god, right?
Yeah.
And the way in which we are supposed to be just like the film just invites you, the lighting, to sort of caress his skin, You want to get closer to him.
Like,
and yet I didn't,
So yes, I'll be honest, like I'm
you
not
have a big crush on Brad Pitt.
I'm not a straight woman. Like I don't get like, I'm not sexually attracted to men, but mm-hmm. I will say that like, I do think Brad Pitt has, like, to me and he's now like, what, 55 or something. Mm-hmm. He looks so interesting, and he is like so handsome to me. Like he's just so captivating on screen, and I think it's part of it is the character that he plays in this film, and the way that character is just so comfortable in his own skin and so like laid back and like easygoing that like when he's just like standing there and like existing, it's like, and the camera just adores him. Like, you know, I mean, like so much of the pleasure of cinema is in images, and I find those images just like so beautiful, like just so beautiful.
I think you were giving this movie way more credit than it deserves. Like, no, and I mean this sincerely, because like the points that you're making about like, oh, they showed Van Nuys and they show Cliff in his like shitty house and all of the people who make Hollywood that don't get the benefits of someone like a Rick Dalton. Like that was it was so fleeting. It was so passing. There was no point in that fucking 2,000-hour movie other than like a tiny blip where we're shown that. It doesn't sustain. So the whole time we're supposed to think that Cliff is like this cool guy. And just as you described, Carol, like he's comfortable in his skin. He's kind of cool. He's kind of hot. Like, you know, we're supposed to find him so appealing. So then when we find out that he kills his fucking wife and gets away with it, it doesn't matter.
No, right. And that is exactly, like, that's exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about how deeply troubling this movie is and how,
and this is the thing is that, like, the fact that Tarantino thinks that it is acceptable and okay and everybody fucking around him and half of the critics all think that this is an amazing, wonderful film that should have been made pisses me off. Yeah. Like in this day and age, that is not the story that should be told about this time in Hollywood. Right? And this is Tarantino doing what he fucking does. And the movie was filled with incredible amounts of male gaze. Incredible. So like, yes, they definitely did that scene with Brad Pitt with Cliff on the roof. And I was expecting Sharon Tate to look out the window and be like, who's that hot guy? Like that was the kind of feeling that scene was setting up, right?
That's what was, I want to get into that again, because that's what I expected to. And the fact that we don't get it, I think is hugely important.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I think like you talk about the film being full of the male gaze, and I think you're absolutely correct. And I think the fact that shot of Cliff is also set up to, you know, he's also set up to be a figure of adoration to the male gaze, right? But in a different way, perhaps, than, you know, we look at the, you know, hundreds of young women hitchhiking on, you know, Burbank Boulevard that Cliff ogles or whatever, right? Like, Cliff Booth is meant to be an object of like sexual and gender fascination for other straight men in this film. And so the fact that Tarantino does not then try and displace that desire onto Sharon Tate as kind of a narrative excuse, like, oh, it's okay to ogle Brad Pitt because you're actually doing this through the eyes of Sharon Tate. Like the fact that we don't get that, I thought was kind of fascinating. But I also thought that it was fascinating that Cliff is the only person in the film who receives the same kind of like loving treatment, but also positionality as an object of observation is other than Sharon Tate. Like Sharon Tate exists in this movie to be an object under observation, whether it's Steve McQueen, you know, talking about her at the party as she dances, whether it's Sharon watching herself on the movie screen. She is an object, not a subject. And so I just found it fascinating that Cliff and Sharon were both like this.
I'm not as willing to concede that point, though, because I agree that there is a little bit of that, but Sharon Tate is not a character in this movie where Cliff is.
That's what I'm saying, you know? So like...
So the leering, like... So in this movie, part of the male gaze is very, very literally the camera, right? You see women's legs, women's body parts. You're literally following Sharon Tate's body around. When you see Cliff's wife, there's a shot of her ass in a bikini before she's murdered, right? Like, if you go back and watch the movie, you'll see constantly the way that women's bodies are fragmented and shown in pieces, right? They do that a little bit with Cliff, like in the ranch, they show his legs because they're showing the shot of all of the people in the background with his, like this sort of power shot. But again, like a reminder of this is that the way that the camera leers on men's bodies is very different than the way it leers on women's bodies. So even showing and this is what you said earlier, but even showing his, like this sort of sexy topless man is really for the admiration of male characters more than, men more than anything. It's not sexualizing. It's not a like sexualizing, degrading type of view. It's a empowering type of view or a jealous making type of view.
And I mean, I think I want to talk a little bit more about Sharon Tate in this film because understandably, a lot of the conversation around this film has revolved around Sharon Tate. After I think it was at Cannes Film Festival. I'm not certain about that, but there was a point at which Quentin Tarantino was confronted by a question from a journalist or reporter who was like pressing him on like, how few lines Margot Robbie has as Sharon Tate in the film, and like what that says. And Tarantino, being the egomaniacal, like self, obviously he sees himself as some kind of genius. Like he didn't even deign to respond to the question. He said, "I reject the hypothesis." Like that was his famously quoted response. And it's like, and so Sharon Tate in this film, like, and I had to to be honest, I had to have a conversation with another friend about this to process my feelings around it. So some of this comes from my conversation with someone else. But like what they said and which I think is absolutely right. And, is that, so yes, we follow Sharon Tate around. We go with her to a theater in Westwood where she watches a film, and interestingly or notably, like it's Margot Robbie in the audience as Sharon Tate watching herself on screen, but the footage of the film is the real footage, and it's the real Sharon Tate on screen, like in the clips from the film. But like, is that so? Yes, it's true that Sharon Tate doesn't have many lines at all, but like she's also kind of what sense we do get of her is almost of this like ethereal angel. Like it's not like she doesn't get to be human. She doesn't get to be flawed in any way. We just observe. And so it's, some people say that that there's, and I like, okay, I was, there was something about the ending. So huge spoilers, the film rewrites history ultimately. And ultimately Sharon Tate is not murdered in this film. And we get this moment between Leonardo DiCaprio's character and Sharon Tate, and it's this kind of alternate history. Like, what if she'd lived a kind of bridging of the gap, passing of the torch between the kind of Hollywood that, Leonardo DiCaprio's character represents and the kind of Hollywood that perhaps Sharon Tate and her association with Roman Polanski represent, and so on. Like, but because Sharon Tate isn't even like a real human being, because she's just like this angelic presence, like it's I don't know, it's dehumanizing in a different way, right? Like Tarantino may sexualize and objectify and demean women a lot of times, but there's almost, to me, like, yes, obviously Margot Robbie is very beautiful on screen, but there's almost also this like worshipful remove at which Sharon Tate is viewed that is in its own way deeply problematic, right? He has, right. Anyway,
yeah, I mean,
I think
she's
totally right.
She's this, excuse me. As I say, she exists in this movie to be an object of observation, and as you say, like, sort of deification. I mean, she at no point demonstrates, or is allowed to demonstrate any sort of, rough edges, or like real humanity. And so again, to go back to the scene at the Playboy Mansion, this party where Steve McQueen is talking about her, we don't hear Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate speak very many lines, right? We see her smiling beatifically. We see her like gliding through life. We see her just, drenched in sun. We see her doing things. We see people watching her, but it's very rare that those instances in which we watch her, she is not being observed by a man and a man is commenting upon her, or she is doing something for a man, as when she goes into a bookstore to buy a book for her husband. You know, it all revolves around what she means to other people rather than what she represents to herself.
Yes.
If Quentin Tarantino were a better writer, and if he were a director with an editor who could rein him in, I think there's a story to be told here about the way that Sharon Tate is still largely unknown in American popular culture. We know her as this, emerging actor. We know her as the victim of this horrific, violent crime, but we don't know much about Sharon Tate as a person. And we are content to have the myth of Sharon Tate be sufficient. And that's horrible of us as a society, right? There's a way in which the film could have indicted the audience while also kind of obliquely participating in that exercise. But this is not the film that does that. And so I was angry at the end when the events, like actual historical events, were rewritten such that Sharon Tate survives. And I'm mad that I got angry about it, but I was like, no, you don't get to save this version of Sharon Tate because she represents this ethereal, doe-eyed baby woman who's unthreatening, in her non-humanity. You don't get to save this version, but, meanwhile, we know that the actual Sharon Tate was brutally murdered. And you definitely don't get to do it in this fucking way, whereby essentially it's like this Mark Wahlberg bullshit. Like, if I had been there, those planes wouldn't have gone into the world. If I had been there, a man's man, I would have set my pit bull on him, would have taken those fucking hippies down. If a real man had been there, things would have went down a different way.
Well, it's interesting too that, so this film, again, it takes place in 1969. The counterculture movement in the U.S. was so important, so politically vital, so valid in so many ways in the larger context of what was happening in the United States. And yet, in this film, it's troubling to me that we are aligned with characters who just flat out hate hippies. And obviously Tarantino certainly is a filmmaker of the you're not supposed to like or admire everything about the central characters, school of thought, but nonetheless they are centered and they are clearly the heroes of this film. And the only nod whatsoever to any kind of even counterculture adjacent, however removed kind of voice or perspective is the Manson family, which of course is completely none of us are sympathetic to the Manson family, right? So of course when Leonardo DiCaprio's character is I hate these fucking hippies or whatever, of course we in the audience want to cheer and be of course, fuck them. They're literally the Manson family. But the fact that the film doesn't make room ever whatsoever to acknowledge the existence of the validity and the importance of say that, the anti-Vietnam War movement or other aspects of sort of counter mainstream culture, artists and voices and work organizations that was happening at that time is, I think, this is a film very much with blinders on. Or it is so calculated in the vision and version of 1969 that it is presenting us with, and it is so. And of course, yes, the title gives away that this film is a kind of fairy tale, that it is not meant, of course, to be quote unquote realistic in its entirety or true or whatever. But nonetheless, I think that it does a real disservice to that period by giving us, by centering hippie-hating, kind of reactionary asshole white dude characters, and never in any way making room for for valid counterculture voices or movements of the time.
I want to go into just real basic feminism analysis 101 because literally like checkbox here of this movie. And this is kind of the shit that pisses me off and is just so Tarantino of like, we went at length about Sharon Tate and her lack of character, really. But the women in this film were just all stereotypes. So you had the ragey wife, you had the totally batshit nuts Manson family, like that scene where the women are like screaming. You have this like little girl on set who is the only one that kind of says stuff that's kind of interesting or like real, but she's a child. Totally, but she's a child, right?
No, like, of course, completely.
You have the wife that's gonna die. You have I feel like I'm missing a big one, but and that's not even. Then there's all the women in the background, right? Like the first woman we see is a flight attendant, and then we see women dancing on a plane. Like the women in this movie there's no one that is flushed out. Yep. There's no one. Oh, the wife, Leo.
The woman he marries in Italy.
Italian wife.
You mean the dramatic Italian?
Which what?
The dramatic Italian?
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's no one. So just like woman after woman, anyone that has anything to say is just like annoying, or is there as like, visual, like as a eye candy, right? And so like, it's just really frustrating because there's so many different ways to tell this kind of story, but it had to be done through the lens of these two white dudes that we're supposed to feel bad for and that we're supposed to like admire and kind of identify with. And I actually found it a little bit troubling in the theater we went to. I know I talk about this a lot because I get really frustrated with audiences.
Yes.
The ways that people laugh in an audience and what they laugh at, half the time, like I was like, what the fuck are they laughing at? So the scene, like there's scenes where Rick Dalton's character is really kind of sad that, he might not have a career anymore, that he's kind of like washed up. And like there were these kind of really sad moments and, for all, whatever you think of Leonardo DiCaprio, he's a really good actor. And like everyone's laughing. And I'm like, wait, but is that funny? Like, isn't it like the movie at the same time is trying to make it comedic, but also like there's a sincerity there that I don't necessarily feel comfortable laughing at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no.
Sorry, and then the other sort of just 101 thing is like the massive amounts of violence against women at the end. Like what Ebony was talking about and like kind of how dare you rewrite this narrative in this way that not only you have these like macho men who are like powerful and like the fantasy of I can go in and I can change this history and I can stop shit from happening. And like it is horrifically violent and like horrifically awful to watch them beating this woman's face in and the fucking blowtorch. Like
Jesus.
Right. So and the challenge here, right, is that there are people out there who take any criticism of the depiction of that violence against those women as you're defending members of the Manson family. But they were members of the Manson family. Don't you think they fucking deserved it?
Because that is absurd.
Right. No, I agree. Like, I mean, the fact that we are supposed to actually kind of cheer, to feel this like rah-rah, like fuck yes, when Dalton goes to get his flamethrower from the Nazi movie shoot to literally torch this woman, I mean, it's...
Oh, yeah. And that's another example. She gets, she's obviously in pain from being attacked by a dog, and she just screaming and flailing her arms around like a fucking lunatic. Like, that's not, it's so overdone. Just, it perpetuates again the sort of insanity of women.
Yeah, because, we are supposed to, applaud this, expression of vengeance, right? But we're supposed to applaud an expression of vengeance for a crime that the film does not show us. So, had the Manson family actually executed, Sharon Tate and these four other people in that brutal orgy of violence that actually did occur, and then we see, yes, it would have been problematic. But the point is, we're reacting to something we know has occurred and giving the filmmaker license that he has not earned. In this film, what we see is these hapless fucking idiot hippies, come in and and Cliff Booth sets his dog on them. And then for extended sequences, we are watching people be brutalized. And yes, we know that their intention is to go in and commit a horrific crime, but they have not done it. And so, excuse me, to watch this, it's like the film, it is excessive, and it is designed to be excessive in a horrific way.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, I think it's wrong on its face regardless. Like, I would say that, because to me, bringing my knowledge of what they did do to this film, to me, that is as powerful as if the film had shown it. And it's still, like, I think almost everyone who comes to this film knows, like, has in their mind that, like I watched this whole movie expecting that it was building up to that horrific event, and then it veers at a certain point to the other to an event of vengeance.
I was sitting there so worried about how he was going to handle the gruesome murder of a pregnant woman, and the whole time I was like, "Fuck."
And I mean, so obviously it is meant to be this huge cathartic, like, fuck yeah, audience cheering in the moment, or not moment, but prolonged experience of violence. And this is such a larger conversation about violence on screen, and is vengeance ever, and, like, should it ever be cathartic? Should it ever be, like, exhilarating? And but it is gendered in this film in a way that is deeply troubling. I mean, the women are savaged in ways that the man who's there is, I mean, he is made to suffer, definitely. But the film dwells uniquely on the agony of these women. And, I think that is very revealing about both Tarantino's psyche and attitudes toward women, and what we, the audience, bring to the film in terms of the attitudes that, and what we want to see on screen. In terms of the larger audience reactions to that, whole sequence.
So we actually have to wrap up the main segment, but I do want to bring up race, and I don't want to just put that in the bonus because I think it's important that we address here. So we talked on last week's episode, Carolyn, you talked about the Bruce Lee representation, so maybe we can go over that more in the bonus. But I do want to bring up really quickly, there was a line near the beginning where Cliff says to Rick Dalton, "Don't cry in front of the Mexicans," about the valet workers. And like the audience that Ebony and I were sitting in laughed, like that's a funny thing to say.
There's also a throwaway moment, but when he's doing his big monologue on that Western show,
God,
and the one where the young girl is like, that was the best acting I've ever seen. Like he quote unquote improvises a little alliterative thing about, I don't know, Beaner Bronco Busters or something. Like it's a little racist kind of.
Also
epithet.
On that set, they say, the only good Indian is a dead Indian.
Yeah.
And I think that's worth, I think it's worth noting that on their fake Western, because they actually use real footage from real films in this movie.
Yes.
But on their fake Western that they created for this movie, they actually chose to include straight up racism without commentary, without critique. They just were like, let's put it in because that's
Quentin
the way
Tarantino,
it was.
baby.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to note that, like, you can do this without including that and it would still feel authentic, or you can do it and comment on it, like, not just comment, but critique it, but neither of those things happened. So, fuck you, Tarantino.
Yeah, right. So part of what, I know we got to wrap up, but I just want to say real quick, part of the reason why this version, or rather this fairy tale of LA did not hold sway over me is because I cannot empathize with the plight of a washed up white male film star who is bemoaning the fact that other white men are taking his place. Like, ultimately, the Hollywood that is being ushered into existence in this period, yes, it's Scorsese, it's Spielberg, it's Coppola, it's whatever, right? But it's more white men. So it's a different kind of filmmaking, but it's not, for me, as interesting a shift in, like, if we're just going to talk about Hollywood, talk about the movement from the silent era to talking pictures, right? And the sort of like move from a much more racially and gender diverse movie industry to a one that, has straight white, cis males at the center. Like, whatever, like I'm tired of these hagiographies of middle-aged white dudes, being like, my particular version, the version that I was told would have currency forever. Turns out, I'm losing my cachet. Dude, what the fuck ever,
Yeah. All right. We'll be right back with our weekly freakouts.
Hey, Feminist Frequency Radio listeners. Why not join our Patreon community at patreon.com/femfreak? Seriously, what are you waiting for?
Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. Carolyn?
Yeah. Real briefly, been a hell of a week, or past few weeks, as we record this here in the US with tragic shootings taking place. And, there's a particular image that's been making the rounds these past few days that I think it is going to be one of the enduring, indelible images of the Trump presidency. And it's Trump and Melania with a baby whose parents were killed in a shooting, and in the image, Trump is smiling and giving a thumbs up, and it's just this endlessly kind of fascinating and horrifying image. And I think I think of past presidents, Obama, Bush, men who deported people by the bucket load, who started unjust wars that cost hundreds of thousands of people their lives, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, take your pick. Like, none of them are morally clean, but they could do the performance of human empathy, like when it was needed, and that's why we end up with these horrible moments where, President Bush and Michelle Obama, President Bush gave Michelle Obama a mint. Isn't he just like the sweetest man? When no, he's horrible. He's a horrible, horrible, horrible human being, but he can at least do the performance of human empathy. President Trump, completely lacks that ability on just a fundamental level. And it shouldn't even be important. Like, what should be important are the policies. It's the policies that are actually doing harm. It's, it's all of that. And yet, like, the reality is that yes, he doesn't know how to even act like what a human being is supposed to act like in these situations. And I just feel like that image is going to be, one that endures for decades, and probably, in the proverbial history books of the future and so on. It's horrifying. It's like some weird, it doesn't seem like it should be real, and yet it is. It's another one of those things that just contributes to these years feeling like we're in some kind of bizarro universe where satire has been made reality. And yeah, that's what I'm freaking out about right now.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Ebony, you want to follow that up?
So I am a big fan of the show Endeavor, which is available via Masterpiece Theater. It is, surprise, a cop drama. Anyway, it is a prequel of sorts to the show Morse, which, was hugely popular in the 90s, early 2000s. And it takes as its subject the main character of Morse and, puts him back in 1960s Oxford as a young policeman. And while at the same time, out of one corner of my mouth, I acknowledge and bewail the propaganda that has just overtaken our screens. I'm subject to it. This is whatever. We know my problem. Anyway, this latest season 6, is set, interestingly enough, in 1969. And I find it so interesting. It's not just that it is separated from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by place, right? So Endeavor is set in Oxford, England, but it tackles this, like historical bifurcation, like, you know, this kind of old guard having to cede space and authority to young people and, you know, like cultural changes that it's perhaps not ready for in just such a smarter way. And one of the things that I appreciated about this last season, and I think the show does so well, is the ways in which Endeavor as a police officer and we as an audience are allowed to question the very institution of policing. And so I encourage people to check it out. Would love to have conversations about it. But here's a show about, you know, 1969 that you can, you know, not feel super horrible about watching.
Well, I'm still upset about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So that's what I'm freaking out about. So,
3 hours you'll never get back.
Fuck. So I'm gonna suggest a little mobile game called Flip Flop Solitaire by Zach Gage. It's not new or anything. It's just really delightful. So if you want a little something to play on your phone, Flip Flop Solitaire. Cool. Oh, it's still me. All right.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, we're done, right? Submit your own freak out at feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. Thanks so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Stay tuned for the Freakin' After Party, only available to backers of this podcast. Learn more at patreon.com/femfreak. You can find us everywhere great podcasts are found, and probably some not so great podcasts are there as well. But that is not ours, because ours is great. If you see the little tag that says great, Feminist Frequency Radio will be under that.
Oh my God.
If you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review us. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and all the social medias at FemFreak. This show is engineered by Rob Pera. Sarah Norales provides technical support, artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Join us next week for another feminist dive into pop culture. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Later.